be seated. The guest preacher at the opening Eucharist for our diocesan convention last week was the Reverend Canon Andrew White, who is an Anglican priest that serves a congregation in Baghdad, of all places. He's known as the Vicar of Baghdad and serves a congregation called St. George's, which is the only Anglican church left in Iraq. And he told us just an incredibly powerful story. When the sermon was over, I thought, gosh, that was a great sermon, but when I was really honest with myself, it wasn't really a sermon as much as it was the story of what he's about and what his congregation is about in that place. St. George's is a church that experiences a worshiping community of about 1,500 people over the course of a weekend. It's a small building, not much bigger than our building. And to accommodate that kind of crowd, they have 3 services on Friday, 3 services on Saturday, and 3 services on Sunday. And the Vicar of Baghdad pleads with his people to only come to 1 service over the course of a weekend, that they might accommodate everyone. And he laughed and said, but they don't listen. They just keep coming. It's parish full of children. It's full of the elderly. It's full of singles. It's a very vibrant, active, dynamic kind of a community that's marked as an island in the midst of carnage, warfare, bloodshed, fear. This is a beacon of the kingdom of God in the midst of all of it. It's just astounding. Andrew White has been kidnapped. He described having a blindfold removed to discover that he was sitting in a room with bits of fingers and toes, and said he just experienced the good fortune of knowing people that could pay the ransom to get him out of there. He travels with an enormous entourage of armed guards. His life is under constant threat. He has relapsing, remitting MS. And this guy just keeps going and going and going. He baptized 13 new Christians last year. 11 were killed as a result of their baptisms. He pleads with members of his congregation not to be baptized. Just come. Don't take that next step. And they say, but we want to follow Jesus. And they do. And some of them pay the ultimate price. It's really astounding. In that room at the Cathedral of St. John in Providence, as he told his story, we all began to squirm a little bit in our seats. Because we tried to imagine a world where people were so committed to the church that they would go there if they feared being killed. We tried to imagine a world where members of the community would gather and take care of one another and love one another and be there for one another in the midst of carnage and fear and anxiety. I think we have so much to learn from the church around the world, because the church around the world is still busy being the church, where we've accommodated the world so much. Here in the West, we struggle to make it to church if there's hockey on Sunday morning. We struggle to make a significant financial contribution to the church here in the West, where around the world, people pay with their lives for their commitment to the kingdom of God and service of the risen Lord. And I squirmed in my seat at the Cathedral of St. John because I wondered if I'm doing enough, if I'm faithful enough, if I'm giving enough to the kingdom that Jesus proclaimed and gave his life for. We live in a pretty easy world here in the West. But we need the kingdom just as badly, maybe worse, than it's needed around the world, because we don't know how much we need it. The lessons this morning, particularly this gospel lesson from Zacchaeus, I think is so powerful. On the one level, it's a great Sunday school story, right? We have this diminutive figure that wants to see Jesus, and he climbs a tree to achieve the kind of position to be able to do it. I remember this as a child, this being acted out in Sunday school almost every year because it's such a fun little story. And I think there's a little song that goes with it. I'll spare you the song. But when you strip through the sentimentality, you have a man, a sinner among sinners, a chief of sinners, that thinks maybe Jesus has something he needs, that thinks maybe Jesus has something that could change his life. And he won't let anything stand in the way of that, even his physical stature. So he moves heaven and earth to see Jesus, the Jesus he's heard about. And Jesus recognizes something in him and calls him into deeper relationship. Says to him, I need to come to your house today. And he goes to the house of Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus experiences something in his encounter with Jesus that leads him to change everything. He recognizes he's a fraud. He recognizes how self-serving he is. He recognizes that he's a thief. And he becomes willing to change it all in the name of that experience with Jesus, in the name of the creation of a place, maybe just his own home, where things are set to right, where righteousness is exercised, where the poor have restoration. Zacchaeus lights a little lamp, figuratively, of righteousness and kingdom living in his own home and space. I think that's what the church is called to. I think that's what the church is called to be, a lamp of righteousness and kingdom living in the midst of a world that needs hope and justice and freedom and peace and care and love. The church is called to be a place that says this exterior world we live in is broken and it needs to be fixed, and we're willing to get out there and fix it. We'll start small, but we'll fix it. Wasn't that Jesus' message? Wasn't that what his life was about? Wasn't that what his death was about? Setting the world to right? Saying, I will not stand for this any longer? It can be better. It has to be better. God demands it be better. So as we think about Zacchaeus and his example of lighting the small light, and we think about Canon Andrew White lighting a lighthouse in the middle of Baghdad, let us think about our light. What kind of beacon are we to be as the church? What kind of island of hope and faithfulness are we called to be? And can it be the kind of island that doesn't exist completely separate, but sends out tendrils into the world around us so that the world might become new and different and better? Friends, this day I hope you leave considering the example of Canon Andrew White and his valiant faithfulness in the midst of a culture of fear and death. But I hope you remember it in a way that stirs something within you, that awakens a spirit of faithfulness within you, a spirit of hope within you, to do something more, to do something better, to do the kind of thing that God demands.